Judge Jamal Hayes tapped his fingers rhythmically on the leather steering wheel of his new Mercedes, a subtle hum escaping his lips as he savored the smooth jazz emanating from his car's premium sound system. The rich, intoxicating aroma of the freshly leathered seats was a comforting reminder of his success. Cruising down Maple Avenue, with its row of grandiose mansions and impeccably manicured lawns, Jamal felt a swell of pride and satisfaction. This affluent neighborhood, a testament to his years of dedication and perseverance, had finally become his home. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. But the serenity of his drive was abruptly shattered when the familiar red and blue lights of a police cruiser flashed in his rearview mirror. Jamal's brow furrowed in confusion as he eased the Mercedes to the side of the road. He had been driving well within the speed limit, enjoying the picturesque surroundings, so the sudden need to pull over was perplexing. As Officer Karen Michaels approached the driver's side window, her hand resting firmly on her holster, Jamal's unease grew. "License and registration," Officer Michaels demanded, her voice stern and devoid of warmth. Jamal's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet. "May I ask what the issue is, officer?" he inquired politely. Without acknowledging his question, Officer Michaels seized the documents from his hand, her gaze cold and scrutinizing. She scanned the papers before turning her piercing eyes back to Jamal. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Jamal's confusion morphed into disbelief. "Excuse me? I don't understand what's happening here." "I said step out of the vehicle now," Officer Michaels repeated, her hand tightening ominously around her holster. Jamal's heart raced, but he struggled to maintain a calm demeanor. "Officer, I'm Judge Jamal Hayes. This is my car. I live just down the street. There must be some mistake." Officer Michaels scoffed dismissively. "A likely story. Out of the car now. Don't make me ask again." Jamal reluctantly opened the car door and stepped out onto the pavement, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. He noticed the curious eyes of his neighbors peering through curtains, their whispers and stares adding to his mounting sense of shame and indignation. He fought to keep his composure as Officer Michaels ordered, "Turn around. Hands on the car." "This is completely unnecessary," Jamal protested, though he complied with her command. "I've done nothing wrong." Officer Michaels began a rough pat-down, her movements brusque and unyielding. "We've had reports of car thefts in this area. This vehicle matches the description of one that was stolen last week." Jamal's jaw tightened in anger. "I assure you this car was not stolen. I bought it just 3 days ago. If you would only allow me to explain." "Save it for the station," Officer Michaels interrupted, reaching for her handcuffs. Jamal's mind raced, knowing his rights and the legal protocols better than most. Yet, at this moment, the knowledge felt inadequate against the weight of generational injustice that seemed to press down on him. Still, Judge Jamal Hayes was not a man easily subdued. "Officer Michaels," he said, his voice firm and unwavering, "before you make a decision you might regret, I suggest you contact your superior. I'm confident they would want to know you're about to arrest a federal judge without any probable cause." Officer Michaels hesitated, her hand hovering over the handcuffs as doubt flickered in her eyes. "You expect me to believe you're a judge?" "I expect you to perform your duties correctly," Jamal replied with unwavering resolve, "which includes verifying my identity before making a wrongful arrest." "Call your superior now." Something in Jamal's tone seemed to penetrate Officer Michaels' steely exterior. She took a hesitant step back, her confidence faltering. With a reluctant sigh, she reached for her radio, her gaze never leaving Jamal as she awaited a response. The tension in the air was palpable, almost crackling with the weight of the moment. Jamal could feel the penetrating stares of his neighbors and imagined their hushed conversations behind closed doors. He had worked tirelessly to achieve this level of respect and success, only to find himself now reduced to a mere suspect in the eyes of someone who should have been an ally. As the radio crackled to life, a gruff voice on the other end asked, "Michaels, what's the situation?" Officer Michaels hesitated as she spoke, her voice wavering with each syllable. By the time she finished her explanation, the silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. "Michaels, I need you to stand down immediately." a commanding voice interrupted, filled with authority. "Judge Hayes is a respected member of our community. I'm en route right now." Officer Michael's face went pale as she lowered her radio, her expression a blend of confusion and embarrassment as she glanced at Jamal. I'm sorry, Your Honor. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." Jamal, maintaining his composure, adjusted his jacket with a dignified air despite the situation. "A misunderstanding," he said, his tone edged with a sharpness that cut through the tension. "Is that what we're calling racial profiling these days, Officer Michaels?" Before Officer Michaels could offer a response, the screech of tires signaled the arrival of another police car. An older man with salt and pepper hair emerged from the vehicle and approached them with purposeful strides. "Captain Roberts," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Judge Hayes, please accept my deepest apologies for this incident. I assure you, we will investigate this matter thoroughly." Jamal nodded, his mind racing as he contemplated the broader implications of what had transpired. This incident extended beyond his grievance. It was emblematic of a larger issue affecting countless individuals who had faced wrongful accusations and the destructive effects of unaddressed prejudice. As Captain Roberts turned his attention to reprimanding Officer Michaels, Jamal made a pivotal decision. He wanted to transform this distressing event into a platform for meaningful change. "Captain," he said, his voice firm and resolute, "I would like to discuss this matter with you and Officer Michaels, not merely as a victim, but as someone who believes we can use this unfortunate situation to foster growth and reform." Captain Roberts, taken aback by the judge's response, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and respect. "Certainly, Your Honor. Whatever you require." As they made their way towards the captain's car, Jamal's thoughts raced. Could this be the moment that sparked genuine change, or would it merely fade into the long list of unresolved injustices? Unbeknownst to him, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge his perceptions of justice, prejudice, and the capacity of one individual to effect meaningful change. Once they reached the car, Jamal turned to Captain Roberts. "Captain, we need to engage in a serious discussion about the state of policing in our community. Do you agree?" Captain Roberts nodded gravely. "You're right, Judge Hayes. This incident has highlighted issues I thought we had already addressed." "I'm all ears," Captain Roberts added as Jamal took a deep breath, his gaze shifting from the captain to Officer Michaels, who stood nearby, her face reflecting a complex mix of shame and defiance. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Jamal began, his voice resonating in the quiet of the street. What happened today was not merely a misunderstanding. It was a textbook example of racial profiling. Officer Michaels opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, but Captain Roberts raised a hand to silence her. "Please, go ahead, Judge," he urged, his expression serious and attentive. Jamal continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "What occurred here is a manifestation of a much larger issue. It's not just about one officer or one isolated incident. It's indicative of a systemic problem that perpetuates bias and prejudice, often on an unconscious level." As Jamal spoke, a small crowd began to assemble, maintaining a respectful distance from the unfolding scene. Neighbors who had witnessed the incident from behind their curtains were now stepping out onto their lawns, drawn by the notable presence of the police captain and the dignified demeanor of the man they had just realized was Judge Hayes. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. "I propose we use this incident as a catalyst for meaningful change," Jamal said, his voice resonating across the quiet street. "Not through punitive measures or public shaming, but through a concerted effort of education and mutual understanding." Captain Roberts raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What exactly are you suggesting, Judge?" Jamal turned his full attention to Officer Michaels, who was standing nearby. "Officer Michaels, my goal is not to see you lose your job. That wouldn't address the root of the issue. Instead, I want to extend an invitation to you to spend a week shadowing me in my courtroom." Officer Michaels blinked, clearly taken aback. "Your Honor?" "You'll have the opportunity to witness firsthand the challenges that individuals of color face within our justice system," Jamal elaborated. "You'll observe how unconscious bias influences sentencing, jury selection, in every facet of the legal process. Captain Roberts nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting proposal, Judge, but I'm concerned that our department might not have the resources for such an initiative. I'll make it happen, Jamal interjected confidently. If necessary, I will speak directly with the chief of police. This issue is too important to be hindered by bureaucratic obstacles. As the conversation continued, Mrs. Thompson, Jamal's next-door neighbor, approached with visible concern. Judge Hayes, is everything all right? We witnessed what happened, and we're all quite shaken. Jamal turned to her with a reassuring smile. Everything is under control, Mrs. Thompson. I believe this unfortunate incident could lead to something positive. A spark of inspiration ignited in Jamal's mind. He turned back to Captain Roberts with renewed determination. Captain, what if we took this a step further? Instead of just involving Officer Michaels, we could implement a broader program for the entire precinct. In return, I, along with other judges, could spend time with your officers, gaining insight into the daily challenges they face. Captain Roberts' eyes widened in surprise. That's quite an ambitious proposal, Judge, but I can see the potential benefits. It's more than just potential benefits, Jamal emphasized. It's about dismantling the barriers that divide us. It's about fostering genuine understanding and empathy on both sides. As he spoke, Jamal could see the impact of his words on the gathered neighbors, who were nodding in agreement. Even Officer Michaels, who had been standing rigidly to the side, seemed to be absorbing the gravity of the conversation. We have a unique opportunity here, Jamal continued passionately, to transform a moment of conflict into a powerful chance for collective growth, to demonstrate to our community that we are committed to justice in its truest form. Captain Roberts rubbed his chin thoughtfully. This won't be easy. There will be resistance, both from within the ranks of my officers and from certain elements of the judicial system. Nothing worth achieving is ever easy, Jamal responded resolutely, but I am convinced that it is essential. What happened today is not an isolated incident. It is occurring across our nation every day, and it will persist until we take deliberate, proactive steps to address it. As Jamal spoke, he noticed a young boy standing on the sidewalk, his small face illuminated by a mixture of curiosity and concern. It was Tommy, the son of one of Jamal's neighbors, who had frequently greeted Jamal with a friendly wave each morning as he left for work. Jamal, sensing the boy's anxious gaze, approached him and lowered himself to kneel, ensuring he met Tommy's wide, questioning eyes. Hey there, Tommy. What are you thinking about all of this? Jamal asked gently. Tommy glanced nervously at the cluster of police officers nearby before shifting his gaze back to Jamal. I don't know. My dad always says we should show respect for the police, but they were being mean to you, and you didn't do anything wrong. Jamal's expression grew serious as he nodded. You're right, Tommy. I didn't do anything wrong, but it's important to understand that while the police are here to keep us safe, they can make mistakes, just like everyone else. What truly matters is how we respond to those mistakes. Do we let anger drive us apart, or do we take the opportunity to understand one another and work together to improve things? Tommy pondered Jamal's words for a moment, then his face brightened with a smile. Work together. Jamal gave the boy's hair a gentle ruffle. Exactly, Tommy. And that's what we're aiming to do here. Rising to his feet, Jamal turned back toward Captain Roberts and Officer Michaels, his demeanor resolute. This situation is more than just about us. It's about setting a positive example for children like Tommy. We need to strive for a future where kids don't have to fear being judged based on the color of their skin, whether they're strolling down the street or driving a car. Captain Roberts' eyes reflected a newfound determination as he nodded. You're right, Judge. We owe it to the next generation to do better. I'm committed to supporting your program and ensuring it's implemented across the department. Officer Michaels stepped forward, her voice measured and sincere. Your Honor, I owe you an apology. I made judgments based on biases I wasn't even aware of. I would be honored to be part of your program. Jamal extended his hand toward her. Thank you, Officer Michaels. Recognizing and admitting our mistakes is a crucial step toward genuine change. As they shook hands, a ripple of applause began among the gathered neighbors. Mrs. Thompson, her eyes misty, spoke up. Judge Hayes, we are truly fortunate to have you in our community. How can we help support this initiative? Jamal surveyed the faces of his neighbors, noting a blend of shame, hope, and determination. There is something you can do, he said. This isn't just about the police and the court system. It's about our entire community. I propose we organize a series of town hall meetings where we can come together, discuss these issues openly, and work towards understanding and improvement. Captain Roberts spoke up with agreement. The police department would be glad to participate in those meetings, Judge. It's time we engaged in meaningful dialogue with the community we serve. As the crowd murmured their agreement, Jamal felt a flicker of hope ignited within him. What had begun as a deeply humiliating and potentially dangerous confrontation was now evolving into something far more significant, a force for change that might extend well beyond their small, tight-knit community. He could sense that this moment had the potential to spark a movement, a ripple effect that would challenge long-held beliefs and practices. But as he looked around at the faces in the crowd, each one etched with varying degrees of concern, skepticism, and tentative optimism, Jamal knew all too well that the real struggle was only just beginning. Changing deeply ingrained attitudes and societal norms wasn't going to happen overnight. It would require time, dedication, and a relentless drive. He took a deep breath and clapped his hands together, a gesture meant to bring closure to the day's intense events. "Well," he said with a tired but determined smile, "I think we've had enough excitement for one day. Don't you all agree? Captain Roberts and Officer Michaels, how about we meet tomorrow to start working out the finer details of this program? We've got a lot of ground to cover." His voice carried a note of authority, but also hope, as if he were offering the first step toward a better, more cooperative future. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, with conversations fading into the distance and the police officers returning to their squad cars, Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood longer than most, approached Jamal with a hesitant expression. She was wringing her hands nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. "Judge Hayes," she began, her tone laced with regret, "I have to confess something. When you first moved into the neighborhood, I wasn't sure what to think. I was hesitant. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but I didn't know how to react. I hope you can forgive an old woman's foolishness." Jamal's expression softened, and he offered her a warm, understanding smile. "Mrs. Thompson, there's no need for apologies. Forgiveness is the first step toward true understanding, and I'm just grateful we're all moving in the right direction now." His words were sincere, and as Mrs. Thompson nodded in quiet agreement, it felt like another small step toward healing the fractures that had existed within the community for far too long. As the last of the police cars pulled away, the taillights disappearing into the twilight, Jamal stood alone for a moment, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration wash over him. The weight of what had just transpired, of the challenges that lay ahead, pressed down on him. He turned and headed back toward his house, his mind already racing with ideas and plans for how to turn today's events into something lasting and impactful. Yet, as he reached his front door, he hesitated. A strange unease crept over him, something that had been lurking in the back of his mind all evening but was now coming into sharper focus. There was a lingering feeling that this entire situation was more complex than it appeared on the surface, that perhaps there were forces at play he had yet to fully understand. He shook his head, trying to dispel the ominous thoughts. "One step at a time," he muttered under his breath as he unlocked the door. "One step at a time." But even as he tried to focus on the positive steps ahead, he couldn't shake the sense that this was only the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had initially realized. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Just as he closed the door behind him, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw a text from an unknown number. The message was short, chilling in its simplicity. "Watch your back, Judge." Jamal's blood ran cold. His hand tightened around the phone as his mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? Quickly, he locked the door and drew the curtains, his heart pounding in his chest. The day's events, which had initially seemed like a turning point, now took on a far more sinister tone. Was the incident just a case of racial profiling, or was it something larger, something more insidious? His judicial instincts kicked in as he stared at the message. He knew better than to jump to conclusions without evidence. He saved the number, took a screenshot of the message, and immediately dialed his longtime friend, Detective Marcus Johnson. If anyone could help him navigate this, it was Marcus. "Marcus, it's Jamal. I need your help with something off the books." There was a brief pause before Marcus's familiar voice came through, laced with concern. "Jamal, what's going on?" Jamal quickly recounted the events of the day, ending with the anonymous threat. "I need you to trace this number." Quietly. "Consider it done," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "But Jamal, you need to be careful. If someone's targeting you, this could be bigger than we think. We might need to loop in the higher-ups." "Not yet," Jamal said, his voice firm. "We don't even know what we're dealing with. Let's gather some intel first. Then we'll decide our next move." After hanging up, Jamal found himself pacing the living room. The earlier optimism he had felt quickly dissolving into anxiety. He had made his share of enemies over the years. It came with the territory of being a judge, after all. But this felt different. This felt personal. Just as he was lost in thought, a knock at the door startled him. His heart raced as he approached cautiously, peeking through the peephole. On the other side was Tommy, the young boy from earlier in the day, standing nervously on the porch. Jamal opened the door, doing his best to smile despite the tension swirling inside him. "Tommy, what brings you back here, buddy?" Tommy looked up at him, wide-eyed and anxious. "Judge Hayes, I overheard my dad talking on the phone. He was mad. He said your name, and something about teaching you a lesson. I thought you should know." Jamal's pulse quickened, but he kept his tone calm for Tommy's sake. "Thank you for telling me, Tommy. That was very brave of you. Now, don't worry, okay? Everything's going to be fine. You just head on home." As Tommy nodded and hurried off, Jamal stood at the doorway, watching him disappear into the night. His mind whirled with possibilities. What was going on here? Whatever it was clear this was no ordinary case of profiling, and Jamal was now in the middle of something far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. As soon as Tommy darted away, Jamal closed the door behind him, feeling a storm of thoughts swirl in his head. Tommy's warning had shaken him, and he couldn't help but think about Tommy's father, Jack Wilson. Jack was a prominent local business owner, someone with influence and connections in the community. Last year, Jamal had presided over a case where he ruled against Jack Wilson's company in a high-profile discrimination lawsuit. The decision had not been well received by Jack or his supporters, and Jamal wondered now if that case had set a series of events in motion. Could Jack be behind the strange occurrences in the last few days? Was this all some form of retaliation? Jamal didn't have time to dwell on it because, just as his mind began to race with possibilities, his phone buzzed loudly, pulling him from his thoughts. "It's Marcus," Jamal muttered as he answered. Before Jamal could say anything more, Marcus jumped straight to the point. "Jamal, I've got something for you. You know that number you gave me? It's a burner phone. I traced its activity, and it's been making a lot of calls. Guess where?" Jamal's heart skipped a beat, an uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. "Where?" "The police station," Marcus replied grimly. Jamal's breath caught. His mind reeled. "The police station? You can't possibly mean—" Marcus cut him off before he could finish the thought. "I don't know what to think, Jamal. But whatever this is, it's bigger than just some anonymous messages or warnings. You need to be careful, really careful. I don't like where this is going." After the call ended, Jamal sank into the nearest chair, his mind weighed down by a growing sense of dread. He had always taken pride in his work as a judge, believing that he could make real change from within a broken system. But now, it seemed that every system was turning on him. His integrity, his career, everything he had worked for, was being threatened. He barely had time to process it when the doorbell rang, yanking him out of his spiraling thoughts. The sound jolted him, but he rose cautiously. Opening the door, he was surprised to see Captain Roberts standing there, his expression serious and troubled. "Judge Hayes," the captain said in a grave tone, "we need to talk." Jamal stepped aside, his pulse quickening as he motioned the captain into the living room. Every fiber of his being was on edge. "What's going on? What's this about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Captain Roberts sighed, a heavy sound that only deepened Jamal's unease. "There's no easy way to say this," Roberts began, his voice measured but somber. "We've received an anonymous tip that's opened a can of worms. There are allegations against you, Judge. Serious ones. Bribery, misconduct on the bench. There's going to be an investigation." Jamal felt like the ground beneath him was slipping away. His stomach dropped, and a wave of disbelief surged through him. "What? That's absurd. You can't seriously believe that I—" Roberts interrupted him with a stern look. "It doesn't matter what I believe, Judge. What matters is that these allegations are out there now, and people are going to dig. And from what I've seen, it's not looking good. I had to warn you." As Captain Roberts left, the door closing behind him, Jamal stood frozen for a moment, his mind spinning out of control. This couldn't be happening. Everything was falling apart, and it all felt too coincidental. The traffic stop, the strange text messages, Tommy's cryptic warning, and now these baseless allegations. Everything was pointing to one thing. Someone was out to destroy him. But who? And why now? Jamal barely slept that night. Tossing and turning his questions plagued him. By the time the first light of dawn crept through his windows, he had made up his mind. He couldn't rely on anyone else. Not the police, not his colleagues in the judicial system. He was on his own in this, and if he wanted answers, he'd have to find them himself. For the first time in his entire career, Jamal called in sick to work. It felt strange and unsettling, but he knew there was no other choice. He needed time to dig into this, to figure out who was orchestrating this attack on his reputation. Jamal spent the next several hours poring over old case files and court documents, his desk cluttered with papers as he searched for any clue that might lead him to the person behind this scheme. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Several of his rulings in the past year had gone against a particular local construction company, Apex Builders. The company had been involved in numerous legal disputes over safety violations, discriminatory practices, and environmental damage. Apex Builders had taken a few hits recently, and its owner was none other than Jack Wilson, Tommy's father. Jamal's mind raced as he considered the connection. Could Jack Wilson be retaliating for those losses? If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. But even as the pieces started falling into place, something still didn't add up. Why now? And how did the police fit into all of this? Jamal felt like he was on the verge of uncovering something much bigger than he had anticipated. But the full picture remained just out of reach. A sudden knock at the door shattered Jamal's train of thought. Startled, he stood up, his heart racing as he cautiously moved towards the door. His fingers hesitated before reaching for the peephole. He leaned in to take a closer look. Standing on the other side was Officer Michaels, her familiar face looking tense, even troubled. Jamal hesitated for a brief moment before cracking the door open, leaving the chain securely in place as a precaution. "Officer Michaels," he began, his voice laced with confusion. "What brings you here at this hour?" The officer's eyes flicked nervously over her shoulder, as if she feared being watched or followed. Her usually composed demeanor was shaken, and Jamal could tell something was wrong. "Judge Hayes," she stammered, her voice a little shaky, I need to speak with you. It's about what happened yesterday. There's a lot more to it than you realize." Jamal's brow furrowed, uncertainty gnawing at him. But something in her tone made him pause, and after a moment's hesitation, he unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. As Officer Michael stepped inside, Jamal couldn't help but notice her hands trembling, a clear sign that whatever she had to say was weighing heavily on her. "What's going on, officer?" he asked, gesturing for her to follow him into the living room. His concern deepened as they both sat down. The air between them felt heavy, thick with tension. Michael sat quietly for a second, visibly collecting herself before finally speaking. She drew in a shaky breath, as though the words were hard to get out. "That traffic stop yesterday, it wasn't random," she confessed, her voice low. "I was ordered to pull you over." Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief. "Ordered? Ordered by whom?" Michael shook her head, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know exactly. The command came from higher up, from someone with enough authority to give such an order. They didn't tell me why. They just instructed me to find any reason to stop you, to provoke an incident if I could. I didn't understand it at the time, but I was just following orders, like I was supposed to. Jamal collapsed into his chair, his mind spinning with the implications of what she just said. He tried to wrap his head around it, but the idea seemed too twisted to grasp. Why are you telling me this now, Michaels? Why come forward? The officer glanced down at her hands, her face flushed with a mixture of guilt and regret. Because what you said to me yesterday, it stuck with me. You made me think. I became a cop to help people, to serve and protect, not to be used as a pawn in someone's corrupt game. When I heard the rumors about corruption allegations involving you, I started digging, and the more I found out, the more I realized something wasn't right. You're being set up, and I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. As Jamal tried to process the gravity of what she was revealing, a second knock echoed from the front door. His heart sank, the timing unsettling. He exchanged a glance with Michaels before rising from his chair to answer it. Upon opening the door, Marcus, his trusted colleague, stood there, his face grim. "Jamal, we've got a problem," Marcus said, stepping inside with urgency. But his words came to an abrupt halt as his eyes landed on Officer Michaels sitting in the living room. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, suspicion written across his face. Jamal quickly raised a hand, signaling for Marcus to calm down. "It's okay, Marcus. I'll explain everything," he said, ushering him inside. He recounted the conversation, filling Marcus in on Michael's revelations. As each detail unfolded, Marcus' expression darkened, anger flickering in his eyes. By the time Jamal finished, the room was thick with tension, the weight of the situation pressing down on all of them. They all knew that the truth, whatever it was, had only just begun to surface, and that the road ahead was going to get a lot more dangerous. "This goes deeper than we could have imagined," Marcus said, his voice heavy with concern. "I did some digging into Apex Builders, and it turns out they're in the middle of bidding on a massive city contract. We're talking about a project worth millions of dollars. But here's the catch. They have a long track record of violations. Those should automatically disqualify them from getting the contract. Unless, of course, they manage to discredit the judge responsible for those rulings." Jamal's mind raced as Marcus spoke, and the pieces of the puzzle began to click together. He looked over at Marcus as if finishing his thought. "So they're trying to remove any obstacles in their way. But Officer Michaels, do you have any more information that might help us understand what we're up against?" Her voice, which had been hesitant at first, now carried a sense of certainty. "Yes, there's more," she said. "I've been hearing rumors at the station for a while now. Some of the higher-ups, people with real authority, are in Apex's pocket. They've been covering up reports, ignoring the violations, and sweeping everything under the rug." The gravity of what was unfolding settled over the three of them like a heavy fog. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just about Jamal's situation anymore. They were staring down corruption that had infiltrated the entire system, from the police force up to the highest levels of city government. "We're going to need proof," Jamal said, his mind shifting into problem-solving mode. His background as a judge made it clear that without hard, undeniable evidence, they didn't stand a chance. Otherwise, it's just going to be our word against theirs, and that won't be enough to bring them down. Marcus gave a determined nod. "I think I can help with that. I might be able to get access to some internal police records. If we can trace the connection between Apex Builders and the officers who've been covering for them, we'll have something solid to work with." Michaels, now fully committed to the cause, chimed in, "And I know who to watch. There are certain officers whose behavior has raised red flags. I've seen them act suspiciously, and I'm sure they're involved." Jamal glanced between the two of them, feeling a faint glimmer of hope amidst the overwhelming sense of danger. They might just have a chance, but it wouldn't come without risks. It's going to be dangerous. If we're caught digging into this, Marcus didn't hesitate. "It's worth it," he said, his voice unwavering. "This is bigger than any of us. We're talking about bringing down a corrupt system. It's the right thing to do." Jamal's chest tightened as the weight of their decision settled in. They were about to take on something far more dangerous than he had ever expected, but they were in it together, and that made all the difference. As they huddled around the table, surrounded by papers and the faint glow of laptop screens, Jamal couldn't shake the growing sense that they were heading into extremely dangerous territory. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became that they were challenging some very powerful people. People who had everything to lose and wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests at any cost. But Jamal also knew that turning back now wasn't an option. There was too much at stake. It wasn't just his reputation on the line, but the very integrity of the justice system he had sworn to uphold. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his living room, Jamal stood by the window, watching the fading light. In the quiet of that moment, he made a solemn vow to himself. He would see this through, no matter the cost. The truth had to come out, and it didn't matter how powerful the people on the other side were. What Jamal couldn't know was that the path to uncovering that truth would lead him into the darkest corners of corruption, and in the process, put everything and everyone he cared about at risk. The room was silent except for the occasional rustle of paper and the soft click of keys when suddenly, Jamal's phone buzzed again. He glanced down and saw another message from the same unknown number that had been sending him threats. "Back off, Judge. Last warning." Jamal's stomach churned, but he kept his face calm as he showed the message to Marcus and Officer Michaels. The two exchanged a look before their faces hardened with resolve. "They're getting nervous," Marcus said, his voice low. "That means we're getting close." Michaels nodded grimly, her eyes flicking from the message back to Jamal. "They wouldn't be sending threats if they didn't think we were onto something." Jamal took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He looked at the two people beside him, his old friend, Marcus, who had been with him through thick and thin, and Officer Michaels, who had become an unexpected ally after their rocky start. Together, they formed an unlikely team. But Jamal knew they were all in this now. "So, what's our next move, Judge?" Michaels asked. Jamal's gaze shifted to the papers scattered across the table, his mind piecing together the puzzle. "We follow the money," he said firmly. "Every corrupt deal leaves a trail, and if we can find that trail, we can bring this whole thing down." With that, they got back to work. The night wore on, and the city outside grew quiet as darkness settled in. The three of them pored over documents, cross-referencing dates, names, and transactions. The living room table was now completely covered with files, and the air was thick with the tension of discovery. Laptops hummed softly, and their conversation dwindled into the occasional burst of excitement whenever one of them found something suspicious. "Look at this," Marcus said suddenly, his finger tapping on his laptop screen. "There's a series of large deposits into the account of Deputy Chief Richards. They line up perfectly with key decisions he made in favor of Apex builders." Jamal leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the numbers. "Do those deposits lead directly back to Apex?" Marcus shook his head. "Not directly. The money's coming from a shell company, but here's the catch. The shell company was set up by a law firm that represents Apex in multiple cases." Michaels chimed in, her voice tense. "Richards has been pushing for increased police patrols in the areas where Apex has properties. He's been saying it's for community safety, but now it's clear what he's been doing. He's covering for them." Jamal nodded grimly, his mind racing. "This is big, but it's not enough. We need something that directly ties Apex builders to corruption inside the police department, something irrefutable." Before they could continue, a loud knock at the door made all three of them jump. Jamal's heart leaped into his throat as he approached the door cautiously. Peering through the peephole, his breath caught. Standing outside, silhouetted in the dim light of the porch, was Captain Roberts. "It's Captain Roberts," Jamal whispered to the others. Marcus and Michaels exchanged uneasy glances. "What do we do?" Marcus asked quietly. Michaels' brow furrowed with concern. "Should we hide? If he's part of this, we don't want him seeing all of this laid out." Jamal hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "No. If Roberts is involved, hiding will only make us look guilty. And if he's not, maybe he can help us." He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders before opening the door. "Captain Roberts, this is unexpected," Jamal said, forcing a calm smile. Roberts' face was grim as he stepped inside. His sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in Marcus, Michaels, and the piles of papers scattered everywhere. "Detective Johnson." "Officer Michaels," Roberts said, his voice tight with suspicion. "What exactly is going on here?" Jamal knew the moment had come to take a leap of faith. He glanced at Marcus and Michaels, then back at Roberts. There was no turning back now. "Captain, we've uncovered something serious," Jamal began. "I think it's time you knew the truth." "Captain, we've uncovered something significant," Jamal began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "We're investigating a web of corruption within the police department, and it seems tied directly to Apex Builders. We believe the traffic stop I was involved in, along with these recent allegations against me, are all part of a much larger conspiracy. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time." For a long moment, Captain Roberts' face remained unreadable, his expression stone-like as the room grew thick with tension. The silence seemed to stretch endlessly, heightening the gravity of the situation. Then, much to everyone's surprise, Roberts released a long, heavy sigh and sank into a chair, his weariness palpable. "I knew something was off," he said, his voice subdued but laced with exhaustion. "For months, I've noticed things that didn't add up, strange occurrences, unusual orders. But every time I tried to dig deeper, I hit roadblocks. People shut me down. I just didn't have enough to go on, and to be honest, I wasn't sure who I could trust." A wave of relief swept over Jamal. "So you're not involved in any of this?" Roberts shook his head, the weight of the situation evident in his eyes. "No, but I've been hesitant to push too hard. These people, whoever's behind this, they're powerful. They have reach and influence. I was afraid for my family, my pension. Everything I've worked for could be taken away." Detective Michaels, who had been standing quietly nearby, stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Captain, we need your help. We're close to breaking this wide open, but there are records and files we don't have access to. Files only someone like you can get. If we don't act soon, these people might bury it all." Roberts looked from Michaels to Jamal and then to Marcus, who had remained silent but watchful. Conflict flickered across the captain's face, torn between his loyalty to justice and his fear of what might come. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded. "All right," Roberts said, determination replacing the hesitation in his voice. "I'm in. What do you need me to do?" As night deepened, the group worked tirelessly, pulling together a puzzle of corruption that had gone unnoticed for too long. With Captain Roberts' help, they began to uncover a trail of damning evidence: doctored police reports, suspicious financial transfers, and promotions of officers with questionable backgrounds. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to confirm their worst fears. The corruption was widespread, deeply embedded in the system, and reached far higher than they had initially suspected. The hours passed in a blur, and by the time the first light of dawn spilled through the windows, painting the room in a soft golden hue, they had finally pieced together the framework of a massive conspiracy. They had names, dates, and documents, all the proof they needed. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, a new problem emerged. "We've got the evidence," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his tired eyes. "But how are we going to use it? If we hand this over to the authorities, there's no guarantee it won't get buried or dismissed. These people, they've got connections, powerful ones. They reach up to the mayor's office." Jamal paced the room, his usually pristine judicial robes now rumpled and stained with coffee from the long night. The frustration was mounting. "We can't take this to the wrong people. We need to make sure it lands in the right hands, someone who can't be bought or influenced." Michaels, leaning against the desk, crossed her arms thoughtfully. "What about the press?" she suggested. "If we make this public, it'll be harder for them to sweep it under the rug." Roberts quickly shook his head. "That's risky. We don't know who we can trust in the media. Some reporters are connected to the same circles as the people we're investigating. The last thing we need is for this to blow up in our faces." Jamal's mind raced through possibilities, but then a memory sparked, a glimmer of hope. "Wait," he said suddenly. "I know someone, Sarah Chun. She's an old friend from law school. She's working for the State Attorney General's office now. If we can get this evidence to her, she's outside the reach of these local players. She won't be bought off, and her office has the power to launch a formal investigation. Marcus sat up straighter, nodding in agreement. That could work. The state AG's office would be untouchable by the people we're dealing with. It's the safest option we've got. As they began to formulate a plan for contacting Sarah, the room was abruptly filled with the sound of a car alarm blaring outside. Everyone froze, tension spiking instantly. Jamal's heart pounded as he rushed to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peer outside. His eyes scanned the street, but what he saw made his blood run cold. He turned back to the group, his voice barely above a whisper. "They found us." "We've got company," Marcus said, his voice strained and urgent. "There are 2 unmarked cars parked across the street. I don't recognize the men inside, but they're watching the house." Roberts quickly moved to another window, his face darkening with concern. "They must have figured out we're onto them," he said grimly. "We need to act fast. We can't stay here any longer." Michaels, clearly panicked, glanced anxiously between the windows. "But how are we supposed to get out without being seen? They'll spot us as soon as we leave." Jamal's mind raced, trying to come up with a solution. Then it hit him. "The back gate," he said, his voice gaining determination. "It leads to an alley that connects to the street behind us. We can use it to slip away, but we'll need a diversion." The group quickly devised a plan. Roberts would leave the house openly, drawing the watchers' attention away from the back. Meanwhile, Jamal, Michaels, and Marcus would use the cover of early morning shadows to make their escape through the back gate. "Once you're clear," Roberts instructed, "head straight to the state attorney general's office. Don't stop for anything. I'll try to shake these guys and catch up with you there if I can." Jamal placed a hand on Robert's arm, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Captain, for everything." Roberts nodded solemnly, his face lined with determination. "Just promise me one thing, Judge. When this is all over, we'll make sure to clean the house properly. No more half measures." "You have my word," Jamal replied firmly. With that, Roberts made his way to the front door. He deliberately made a show of checking his watch and hurrying to his car, creating a distraction. As expected, one of the unmarked cars pulled away from its position and followed Roberts. "Now's our chance," Marcus whispered urgently, his heart pounding. Jamal led the others through the kitchen and out the back door. They moved swiftly and silently along the fence, crouched low to avoid detection. When they reached the gate, Jamal carefully eased it open, wincing at every creak. They slipped into the alley, their movements as quiet as possible. Just as they neared the end of the alley, a shout rang out behind them. "They've spotted us," Michaels hissed, her voice filled with panic. "Run! Run!" Jamal commanded, urgency in his voice. They burst out onto the street, sprinting toward Marcus's car parked a block away. Behind them, the sounds of hurried footsteps and angry shouts grew louder. As they reached the car, a gunshot rang out, shattering the rear window. Marcus slammed his foot on the accelerator, the tires screeching as they tore away from the scene. "Is everyone okay?" Jamal asked, his voice filled with concern as he looked back at the chaos they were leaving behind. Michael slumped in the back seat and gasped, "I'm hit. It's just a graze, but it hurts. Hang on." Marcus's face was set in grim determination as he navigated through the traffic. "We're almost there," he said, weaving through the congested streets with practiced skill. Jamal clutched the flash drive containing their critical evidence. Every piece of their struggle, every bit of their fight against corruption, was contained within that small device. But as they turned onto the main street leading to their destination, Jamal's heart sank. Ahead of them stretched a police blockade, flashing lights and officers blocking the road. "It's a trap," Jamal realized aloud, his voice tinged with despair. "They anticipated we'd come here." Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles white. "What do we do now, Judge?" Jamal's mind raced his thoughts, a whirlwind of possible outcomes. They were cornered, with few options left. After a brief moment of contemplation, he made a decision. "We need to go to the media. It's our only shot." "Marcus, head for Channel 7 News," Jamal directed with resolve. "We're going to broadcast the truth to the entire city." Marcus swerved onto a side street, narrowly avoiding the police blockade. The car jolted as they took the detour, and Jamal knew they were on a tight schedule. Their pursuers would soon realize their new destination, but for now, they had a small window of opportunity. Sometimes, Jamal thought, a narrow escape was all it took to make a difference. As they sped through the awakening city, the first light of dawn glinting off the skyscrapers, Jamal offered a silent prayer. They had one chance to reveal the truth and dismantle a corrupt system. The stakes couldn't be higher. "Hold on, everyone," Marcus called out as he took another sharp turn. "We're almost there." The Channel 7 News building loomed ahead like a distant beacon of hope, offering a glimmer of salvation amid their frantic flight. As they closed in on the building, Jamal's eyes widened as he spotted a concerning development. More police cars were converging from side streets, cutting off their escape routes. "They're boxing us in," he realized with a sinking feeling. "Marcus, we need to." His words were abruptly interrupted when a massive SUV slammed into their car with a violent crash. The world spun uncontrollably, metal groaned under immense pressure, and then everything went black. Jamal awoke with a groan, his head throbbing painfully. The acrid smell of smoke filled his nostrils, and he could taste the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. Blinking away the disorientation, he tried to make sense of his surroundings. Their car had been overturned, resting precariously on its side. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood, and Marcus was slumped over the steering wheel, a deep gash marring his forehead. In the back seat, Michaels was stirring, her face contorted with agony. "Marcus! Michaels!" Jamal shouted, his voice rough and strained. Marcus lifted his head slowly, wincing in pain. "I'm okay, I think," he managed to say. Michael's voice came from the back seat, filled with distress. "I'm still here, but my leg's pinned outside. I can't move it." Jamal's heart raced as he heard the wail of approaching sirens. They were running out of time. The flash drive, he suddenly remembered, patting his pockets with increasing urgency. A wave of relief washed over him as his fingers closed around the small device. Their critical evidence was safe. "We need to get out of here," Jamal said, unbuckling his seatbelt and trying to keep his voice steady. "Marcus, can you get out?" Marcus nodded, his movements stiff and pained. He struggled with his door, finally managing to push it open with a grunt and clamber out of the wreckage. Jamal followed suit, pushing his way through the twisted metal. They both turned their attention to Michaels. "My leg's stuck," Michaels said, panic creeping into her voice. "The door's crushed. I can't." "We'll get you out," Jamal reassured her. He and Marcus began pulling at the wreckage with all their strength, ignoring the sharp pain from the cuts on their hands as they worked desperately to free her. The sirens grew louder, and Jamal could see the Channel 7 building in the distance. So close, yet seeming impossibly far away. After a final, intense effort, they managed to create enough space for Michaels to squeeze through. She stumbled as she put weight on her injured leg, and Jamal quickly stepped in to support her. "We can't outrun them," Marcus said, glancing nervously at the approaching police cars. "Not with Michaels hurt." Jamal made a swift, critical decision. "You two create a distraction. I'll head for the news station." "No way," Michaels protested, her voice strained with concern. "We're in this together." "Listen," Jamal said urgently, his resolve firm. "This is bigger than any of us. The truth has to come out, no matter what. I have the best chance of getting through alone." Marcus and Michaels exchanged a brief, solemn look, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Judge," Marcus said, his voice heavy with worry. "You too," Jamal replied, pressing the flash drive into Marcus's hand. "If I don't make it, find a way to get this out." With a final nod, Jamal turned and bolted toward the Channel 7 building. Behind him, he heard Marcus and Michaels yelling, creating a commotion to draw the attention of the incoming officers. As Jamal sprinted down the sidewalk, his lungs burned with exertion, and every step felt like an assault on his battered body. Despite the pain and exhaustion, he pushed forward, driven by an unrelenting need to expose the truth and bring justice to light. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. He was halfway to the building when a police cruiser screeched to a halt directly in front of him. The sound of the tires skidding on the pavement sent a jolt of fear through Jamal, propelling him into the nearest alley. His heart raced uncontrollably as he heard the urgent, pounding footsteps of the officer chasing after him. The alley was a chaotic labyrinth of rusty dumpsters, fire escapes, and tangled wires. Jamal weaved through the cluttered space, expertly navigating over stacked trash bins and ducking under low-hanging pipes. Each step was fueled by sheer adrenaline as he zigzagged through the narrow passageways, trying to shake his relentless pursuer. Despite his best efforts, the officer's footsteps grew louder, their rhythm unmistakably closer. Jamal could hear the heavy breathing of his pursuer, a chilling reminder of how dangerously close they were. Just when he began to lose hope of evading capture, he spotted a sliver of opportunity. A partially open door set into the side of a nearby building. With a desperate burst of speed, Jamal darted inside, narrowly avoiding the officer's view. The interior of the building was dimly lit and smelled faintly of chemicals. He found himself in a storeroom cluttered with shelves full of cleaning supplies and assorted equipment. Instinctively, Jamal crouched behind a stack of large boxes, trying to suppress the sound of his ragged breathing. He listened intently as the officer's footsteps pounded past the door, fading into the distance. For a moment, an eerie silence enveloped the room. Then, the stillness was broken by a voice crackling over a police radio. All units be advised. Suspect Jamal Hayes is headed towards Channel 7 News. Apprehend at all costs. He is to be considered armed and dangerous. The announcement sent a shiver down Jamal's spine. The police were framing him as a criminal, potentially undermining any credibility he might have left. He had to get to the news station before they could manipulate the narrative further. Gathering his composure, Jamal cautiously navigated through the building, which seemed to be an office complex, abandoned in the early morning hours. As he passed a window, a jolt of realization hit him. He was actually in the building next to Channel 7 News. A risky, yet potentially game-changing idea began to form in his mind. He found the stairwell and ascended to the roof, the crisp morning air invigorating his senses as he emerged into the open. From his vantage point, he could see the Channel 7 building looming ominously next door, separated by a narrow alley about 10 feet wide. Jamal's nerves were on edge as he prepared himself for a daring leap. "This has to be the craziest thing I've ever done," Jamal muttered under his breath as he backed up for a running start. With his heart pounding and adrenaline surging, he sprinted across the roof, pushing himself to the limit. As he reached the edge, he propelled himself off with all his might. For a heart-stopping moment, Jamal was suspended in the air, the alley yawning beneath him. Then, his feet landed on the opposite roof, and he rolled to mitigate the impact. Breathless and exhilarated, Jamal pulled himself up. He had made it. He was now on the roof of Channel 7 News. He quickly located the roof access door and made his way into the building. The hum of activity from the newsroom below grew louder as he descended the stairs, his mind racing with thoughts of how to convince them to put him on air. Would they believe his story? Bursting into the bustling newsroom, Jamal's sudden appearance drew astonished glances from the staff. "My name is Judge Jamal Hayes," he declared, his voice cutting through the room's chatter. "I have compelling evidence of widespread corruption within the police force and city government. I need to get on air immediately." For a moment, the room was engulfed in stunned silence. Then, a woman stepped forward with a look of sharp interest. "I'm Linda Chun, the executive producer," she said, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized him. "You have 2 minutes to convince me why I should risk my career by putting you on the air." Jamal took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before he began to speak. He meticulously outlined the evidence they had uncovered, detailing the intricate web of connections between apex builders and corrupt officials. He spoke of the threats and attempts to silence him, painting a vivid picture of the corruption that had infected the system. As he recounted the events, he observed the shock and dawning realization on Linda's face. Her expression shifted from skepticism to a profound understanding of the gravity of the situation. When Jamal finished his account, Linda remained silent for a long moment, her mind processing the information. Finally, she turned to her team with a sense of urgency and determination. "Get him to make up. We're going live in 10 minutes, she commanded. Immediately, a flurry of activity erupted around Jamal. A makeup artist rushed forward, carefully applying concealer to his cuts and bruises, trying to present him in the best possible light. Meanwhile, Linda took the time to brief him on what to expect. "We'll introduce you at the beginning," she explained, her tone both reassuring and intense. "Then you'll have 5 minutes to lay out your case. Be clear, be concise, and be prepared for pushback. Once this airs, there's no telling how the situation will unfold." Jamal nodded, feeling a rush of adrenaline. His heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. This was it, the pivotal moment where everything would come to light. As he was escorted to the set, he caught a glimpse of a TV in the corner of the room. His breath caught in his throat as he saw footage of Marcus and Michaels being arrested, their faces distorted with panic as they were labeled as accomplices in a judge's crime spree. The image fueled his anger and determination. He knew he had to fight for justice, not only for himself but for them as well. The studio lights blazed intensely as Jamal took his seat on set. The anchor, a man with a perfectly coiffed haircut and a demeanor of polished professionalism, shot him a questioning look. "We're live in 30 seconds, a voice announced from behind the scenes. Jamal closed his eyes for a brief moment, centering himself amidst the chaos. He thought about all the individuals who had suffered under the corrupt system, about Marcus and Michaels who had put everything on the line to help him, and about young Tommy growing up in a world where justice seemed elusive and far off. "And we're live in 3, 2, 1, the voice counted down. The anchor's voice cut through the tension, smooth and authoritative. "We interrupt our regular programming for a special report. Joining us now is Judge Jamal Hayes, who claims to have uncovered evidence of widespread corruption within our city's government and police force. Judge Hayes, the floor is yours." Jamal turned his gaze directly toward the camera, his voice unwavering and resolute. "Citizens of our great city, I address you today with a heavy heart and a pressing message. Our justice system, the very bedrock of our society, has been tainted by corruption." As Jamal detailed the evidence and exposed the connections they had discovered, he noticed the growing shock among the crew members around him. The hum of phones ringing and the frantic movements in the background underscored the gravity of the broadcast. Just as he was midway through his explanation, the studio doors burst open with a sudden jolt. A contingent of police officers, led by Deputy Chief Richards, stormed in with determined strides. "Cut the feed," Richards bellowed with authority. "This man is under arrest." But before Richards could advance further, Linda Chan stepped decisively between them, her expression a mix of defiance and resolve. As Jamal took in the unfolding scene, he thought, could light the way forward as he stepped into his new office. The room was modest, a far cry from the grand chambers he once occupied as a judge. Yet, the setting didn't diminish his resolve. The work ahead demanded something different: grit, determination, and, above all, a community of individuals who were ready to stand up against being silenced, marginalized, and ignored. As the early morning sun filtered through the windows, casting a warm, golden glow across his office, Jamal paused for a moment to reflect. His gaze fell upon a framed photograph that sat prominently on his desk. The image captured a significant moment, a snapshot of him and Tommy at the recent community meeting. It had only been a few weeks since that pivotal event, but the impact of Tommy's words still resonated deeply within him. "I want to help make things better," Tommy had said, and those words had struck a chord in Jamal's heart. They encapsulated the very essence of his decision, the reason behind the risks he had taken. It was the realization that even one person, driven by the courage to stand up for what is right, could indeed make a profound difference. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. It was another update from Sarah, a signal of the intensifying investigation into the mayor's office. The stakes were high, and the impending battle promised to shake the very foundations of the city. Yet, despite the mounting pressure and the deep-seated corruption, Jamal felt an unusual calm. He was acutely aware of the systemic flaws and the entrenched dishonesty that plagued their institutions. However, he also knew he was no longer alone in this struggle. The awakening of the community had been a powerful force, and together, they were forging ahead, relentless in their pursuit of a brighter, more equitable future. The demands of Jamal's new role had far exceeded anything he had anticipated. His days were a whirlwind of activity, endless meetings, orchestrating rallies, and sifting through a mountain of documents with his team to unearth further evidence of corruption. Each day presented its challenges, setbacks, threats, and moments of doubt when progress seemed elusive. Yet, every time he saw another headline about a public official stepping down or witnessed a new wave of protests erupting across the city, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The momentum was shifting, and with each victory, no matter how small, the fight for justice gained more ground. Jamal picked up his phone and composed a message in response to Sarah's latest update. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before he typed with resolve, "Let's bring them down." With a decisive breath, he stood and turned to face the window. The city sprawled out before him, a sprawling mosaic of lights, streets, and bustling life. Every corner, every face, every light. It all held significance in this grand struggle. There was no turning back. The path he had chosen was now his to follow, no matter how arduous or uncertain it might be. Justice, Jamal understood, was not a simple destination to be reached. It was an ongoing battle, a relentless pursuit that required perseverance and unwavering commitment. But he took solace in knowing that he was not alone in this fight. With allies like Tommy, Marcus, Michaels, and Sarah, each one willing to raise their voice and stand firm, Jamal had faith that they would ultimately prevail. Victory might not come swiftly or easily. It might not even arrive in the next year or so, but he was confident that one day, their efforts would bear fruit. And when that day arrived, it would not be the result of any single individual's actions or decisions. It would be the culmination of the collective courage and determination of everyone who had dared to say, "Enough is enough." With a heart brimming with purpose, Jamal took a step forward. The future was filled with uncertainty, but one thing was undeniable. The fight for justice was far from over, and Jamal Hayes was resolute in his commitment to see it through. As the city awoke to the promise of a new day, Jamal couldn't help but smile. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long and challenging journey, but the spark of determination within him was unyielding. The battle for justice had only just begun. As we wrap up today's video, I hope you found it as engaging and thought-provoking as I did. We've covered some powerful themes about justice, understanding, and the impact of individual actions on broader societal change. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What has resonated with you the most from today's discussion? Share in the comments below one key takeaway or lesson you plan to put into practice in your life. Your thoughts and insights not only help me, but also contribute to our community's growth and understanding. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to do so and activate the bell so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.